Greetings, this is Top Tier Tips. I'm Force of Nature and I welcome you to your prime spot for tips and tricks to help you level up with Dead or Alive 5. Alright, so last session I was going over just the risk-reward aspect of Dead or Alive 5. Basically being able to measure the kind of value behind any specific action, whether it's good or bad. Alright, what I'm going to be going over this time is attacking from negative. So when you're basically at situations when you leave yourself at negative. What this is called is Abare, which is the Japanese term for attacking when the opponent thinks you're weak. Or in the case of fighting games like Dead or Alive 5 Last Round, attacking from disadvantage, which is abbreviated to AFD. Anytime you try to attack an opponent when you're at negative frames, you're essentially trying to Abare them. A common way to Abare an opponent is to throw out something that is no more than about -7 on block, then to 2p them, or toss out some sort of a high crush launcher like Ayane's 4p. If you suspect that they'll try to retaliate with a high attack. So, for instance, if they try and throw you with an I7 or a slower throw, you'll high counter them for a highly damaging juggle. If you get counter hit by a mid instead, the potential damage will likely be less than what they will be dealt to the opponent if you counter hit launch some sort of a high attack. That is unless, of course, what they counter hit you with was a launcher of their own. But that again is part of the mind game of handling various frame advantages and disadvantages. Alright, so an example of something like that could be, once I set this up, something like that could be like Ayane's 6PK. Like this one's a common -7 or -6 if you end up hitting it at about tip range, but generally in close it's -7. So if the opponent tries to throw or goes for a high, or basically doesn't go for like a fast mid or even like a relatively fast slow, then you could usually go under with like a high attack. Like I'll show you, like if, for instance, if like Christy here tries to retaliate with like a high jab, for instance, after she blocks like 6PK, take 2P could just go right under it. You see, so there's different variations you can go for here. Like let's say if I was setting it to like counter, oh. It's not really working here, but what generally means is when you end up going for a launch, that's usually what it is. Like on normal hit 4P isn't necessarily that good, but on counter hit it's a lot better. Right there, I know on 2P doesn't do that much damage, like just 5 on normal hit, 6 damage on counter hit, and 7 damage on high counter. But the main point is if you end up getting something that's blocked that's around like -7 or less, like it's even better if you're even at even lower negatives like -3, then you can end up going for an Abare move, which is most commonly usually some sort of a crush attack. The thing you would want to watch out for is if the opponent ends up like using a launcher of their own. Like some things that they can do is, for instance, if they end up let's say if they end up blocking something that is not leaves you at negative but isn't throw punishable on block, then if they suspect you can continue to push buttons, then they can just go for a launcher, for instance. And some launchers can be quite powerful. Like this is just a standard counter hit launch here. You can get like about 70 plus to like over like they're 90 damage if you knock an opponent into a wall. So when you're kind of thinking about Abare, what you're mainly thinking about is how to try and maintain your offense even when you're at negative. But yeah, the big aspect of the mind game when you get your attack blocked is mainly thinking what's the opponent going to do. Basically trying to keep your offense going. So it's usually good to go for attacks that have good crush properties. If you think they're going to go for something slow, then you can try and jab, but if you're more than, say, about -4, if you're more than, say, about around -3 or -4, I don't really advise trying to do an attack that doesn't have crush properties. Like the only time you're trying to jab out is if you think the opponent may hesitate on striking back, or they end up going for something a bit slower, thinking that you won't attack. But most times it's usually good to go for like crush attacks like 1P or like 2P, or if you're feeling frisky, going for like a crush launcher. A main thing to also take into account, which ends up influencing your... Another thing that you have to take into account that influences your decisions is how much health like you end up having. For instance, if you have less health than your opponent, then you obviously have to be wary of putting yourself in situations where the opponent can end up setting you up for a lot of damage. But also, if you do have less health than your opponent, then generally speaking, on average, you're gonna have to take more risks than your opponent in order to be able to win the match. So basically, the person that ends up having the life lead doesn't have to use any sort of like doesn't have to really use any sort of like risky techniques or anything, or stuff that can be like really like unsafe on block or unsafe on whip. So that is something to keep in mind. Because generally, I mean, if you are at a life lead, the main focus is to see if you can try and take advantage of the fact that the opponent's going to have to take more risks to beat you, and kind of hang back and let the opponent try and like just hang themselves. See if you can end up either blocking or letting an unsafe attack whiff. So either be whiffed or blocked and punishing accordingly. Because the opponent's probably not going to be playing as safe if they have to make up a lot of life, because they're thinking that if you both end up playing safe, then the person with more health will probably end up winning in the long run anyway. So, but of course, it's all proportional. Like the bigger the health discrepancy, the more that the person with less health will have to take riskier and more like aggressive tactics. So of course, if you are the one with the life lead, then you're the one that's probably gonna be in the blocking more, because the opponent may end up attempting to Abare you more. For instance, if the opponent ends up doing something that's like, for instance, that is like negative on block but not necessarily throw punishable, then what that ends up meaning is that they may end up trying to see if they can find ways to keep their offense going. Another option, of course, after you end up doing something that's not throw punishable on block, is maybe going for like a sidestep attack. Because of course, for crushes there's low crushes, high crushes, but of course if you're just thinking in the 3D space, there's also sidesteps. So generally, in order to end up beating out a sidestep, you would have to do some sort of like tracking move. I mean, here in the move details at the bottom ends, it tells you what's tracking. So after someone does something that's minus, like for instance, it's like -7 on block, they may not try to. They may try and like retaliate, for instance, with their 6P, their elbow, to stuff any like further buttons. So if they do try to if they do like retaliate with a 6P, or a 3P, then you could do. Then you could usually do a sidestep attack. If I can just get it here. See, like that. So the main thing also, yeah, if you're the one, it could work for both ways. Whether you are the one at advantage or the one at disadvantage, the main mind game is thinking again what the opponent may try to do at certain times. So I mean, so of course you need to try and like think what the opponent's trying to do. Say, okay, they're at negative. Are they going to stand there and block? Are they going to try and do a high crush? Are they going to try and do a? Are they going to try and do like a low crush, like a, or like they're going to try and like YOLO you, hoping that you like that you hesitate or that you just simply mash the punch? Or are they going to try and beat out any sort of like linear retaliation with a sidestep attack? So basically, this is a kind of a big thing to think about a match, is that like what opponents tend to do at certain amounts of negative frames. But when you are actually playing and if you are the one with the life lead, like don't worry about what people think about like turtling or anything. That it's also known as like laming out your opponent. I mean, it's a very legit tactic. I mean, there's like nothing to like really like worry about that. But of course, the biggest thing really to keep in mind when you do go for your Abare or whatever sort of like action you do is to try and always keep in mind risk reward. It's the same as like what I was going over in the last session, is thinking how much perceived or how much potential punishment can you receive for taking that action if the opponent ends up kind of calling you out and guessing correctly against the reward. Like obviously doing like a 2P or 1P doesn't have much. Going for those kind of actions in general don't have much reward, but they do tend to have like a 2P, for instance, especially something like Ione's 2P, which is like 12 frames. I mean, it tends to connect fairly easily. I mean, it beats out all highs at 12 frames. It will beat out any mids that are like 13 frames and slower. So of course, if you are at negative frames, you have to keep that in mind. Like for instance, if you're like at if you're left at -5, then obviously a 12 frame move becomes a 17 frame move. So that is the risk you have to take when you're taking something out. I mean, of course, if you are left at negative frames, then the number one thing that you should be doing is just simply blocking. I mean, of course, another thing you have to keep in mind is if your opponent's character is slow like Bass, you could be like at -3 and still not be at what could be considered disadvantage. Because if you're someone like Kasumi, who's got like a 9 frame jab, 11 frame mid, you can end up beating out a lot of or options, or you can even almost trade if you're at like only -3, like -2, like stuff like that, so you can keep your offense going, as opposed to someone like Bass, or anytime he's at any negative frames or even at like neutral, it's harder for him to get his offense going on a faster character if he doesn't, even at like neutral frames. But that's more or less that's more or less it for now. So anyways, I just want to thank you for tuning in and for checking out the Top Tier Tips Advanced series. Alright, so don't forget to rate and subscribe and leave some beautiful comments below. Like, just let me know what's like been like your favorite thing about this series, or anything that you would maybe like to see in a potential future project. So that's it now. This does conclude the advanced series. So be sure to look out for what kind of future series will be coming out from Top Tier Tips. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.